We called in our fabrication team to figure out how to connect the dots on those front cab mounts.
Since we didn't want to move the middle cross members so we could continue to use the factory tank, I made another cross member that's actually going to hold the rear cab mounts. We made this out of cage tube and some 4-inch pipe. From the factory, all of this stuff was riveted into place, and rather than rivet it, we figured it would be stronger and faster to fully seam weld everything.
And things started to look pretty good. In the front, it looked like we were going to have plenty of hood clearance, which was a definite concern because that Supercharged 5.4 motor is very tall with the supercharger. But there was plenty of frontal area on the 69 truck to make sure we could adequately cool this truck. The nose is actually much bigger than the Lightning truck, so we didn't worry about the radiator. But it was going to have air conditioning, and then there's a heat exchanger for the supercharger, and we were actually going to upsize that for better performance, but all that stuff looked like it was going to have a place to go. Eventually it was time to test fit the 69 bed on our new frame, and it was obvious right away that things were going to have to change a little bit.
In order for the rear end to fit under the Ranger bed, they required moving everything 5 3/4 inches forward. We did this by relocating the leaf spring shackles, the shock mounts, and the rear cross member. We decided to use the factory rear cross member because it incorporated the shock mount, and rather than have to fabricate a whole new cross member, this way we can use the existing shock mount and he can keep the spare tire mount if he chooses to do so. One problem we ran into was that the top of the shock tower was actually going to hit the bed, so we created this drop cup that lowered the shock about 1 inch. And then to equalize the pressure of the shocks, we made a spacer to drop the passenger side shock down 1 inch as well.
Another problem was that the fuel tank wasn't going to fit properly. We tried to use as much of the original exhaust as possible, at least the original exhaust design. And with the flat bed of the 69 bed and the new frame, it just wasn't going to fit right.
Since the gas tank already had all the provisions for the fuel pump and sending unit and all that stuff, we decided to just use a new factory style tank, chop the end of it off, give us enough room for our rear end, and now we're just going to weld on a piece of plate. Started by making a template. I just laid this piece of paper over the area I cut off, rubbed my hands across it, made like a dirt line, pulled it off, cut a little piece of plate out of that. And now we're just going to weld this piece of plate onto here, and we'll be good to go.
And we found that with the bed sitting on the new frame, there was a body line mismatch where the bed looked like it was 3 or 4 inches taller than the cab. So it would take a little creative work to make this to line up right.
So in order to get the bed to sit even with the cab, we had to channel the braces so that the bed would sit lower and sit even. We wanted to maintain the integrity of the bed and actually be able to carry a load in it. So rather than chop the bracing all the way out, we notched it where we absolutely had to, and then we boxed it in with 16 gauge, which is what these braces are made of originally.
And this actually kind of built in a slight rake to the truck to make it look, as we thought, a little bit more aggressive. It wasn't a ton of work, and Adam was able to cut and re-weld those supports under the bed without disturbing the existing bed liner in the truck bed. So that was pretty amazing. But once we got those cuts made and everything set back on with that adjusted wheelbase, we had something that looked like a truck. So at this point, things were going pretty smoothly. Most of the changes were mechanical in nature, cut, weld, push things around. We knew the wiring would be a little bit challenging because we were going to use the factory Ford EC5 engine management controller and transmission controller to run this thing, because under the skin, this truck really wasn't supposed to know that it wasn't a 2002 Lightning. So Trevor was tasked to add some things to the harness. We're running a vintage air setup. We're going to run a Dakota Digital gauge setup in the dash, wire in some audio and some other creature comforts, but then make sure that the rest of the truck still thought it was a working 2002 Lightning, all the way down to the anti-lock brakes. So that'll be our next challenge on Project ThundersTruck.